Slide-based tours only have a start and end position, and worldwide telescope smoothly moves between them. However, you may need finer control to change views, location, or appearance of objects in a more flexible fashion. To do this, you can use the timeline editor for each slide of a tour. So first, let's start by creating a tour. So guided tours, create new tour. We call this timeline test. Have to add a new slide, and then I right-click on the slide and say Create Timeline. This creates a timeline that's shown at the bottom in a docked view right now, and it has a single object, which is the camera, added to the timeline. We'll be adding other things to it. You'll see that. These are the buttons to add and delete keyframes. This is a transport control for the timeline. It has its own kind of built-in player, so you can play just through one timeline of a single slide by itself. This is the time slider. I can grab time here, and then this square or rectangle and any other ones you see here are all keyframes, and I'll talk about more of that later. And then under the plus sign, but underneath to the left of the object, that expands a menu of other attributes of that object, like the camera encodes a lot of other things, and some of them are things like where it's looking, its zoom, its angle, that sort of thing. And you can change all those independently. The whole timeline can either be in a docked, or I can click on this and it becomes undocked. It becomes like something I can move around. This is good if I want to make it bigger in order to see more of the things the keyframes I'm changing. However, sometimes if I just want to use it for transport control, I dock it and then just use the transport keys over here. So one of the things just to remember is that when you have different look at modes, sky, solar system, planets, panoramas, so forth, each of those has to be in its own slide. You can't change those within a slide. So just that gives you some. But as far as how much work you put into the timeline versus how much you have into the slide, that's kind of up to you, except for some general things. You can do entire shows in a slide probably if you're not changing modes, but it might be a little unwieldy, or if you ever want to break it down into pieces, that you could reuse. Slides are a more natural kind of building block. So in this example, we're going to start with look at solar system, which is the mode we're in now. So I'm going to look at actually talk about two things. I'm going to add constellations to the timeline. So if I click on this and constellation figures, which are on here, if I right click and say add to timeline, now here you'll see constellation figures are on the timeline. And then I'm also going to add planetary orbits. So if I go over in the under 3D solar system planetary orbits, I'll say add to timeline, and now you see there's another object called planetary orbits. And then you can also add text. In this example, I'm going to add two text elements. One text is I'm going to call our solar system. And then I'll make another text object called the sky. I'm going to actually right-click to add both these to timeline. Now this brings up another trick. These are overlaid on top of each other. I can choose them with a mouse, but sometimes it's a little bit hard. I can go to guided tours and say show overlay list, and now the text elements actually show up here where I can click on them here in exactly the same way as selecting them on the screen. And this is helpful for when I have a lot of elements that are overlaid each other. Sometimes they're invisible because I change their properties. In DOM mode, it may be hard to find them. And so this is a great way by looking at the overlay list. So right click and say add to timeline, and add to timeline. Now I have those two on the timeline as well. So the keyframes on each of these, I'm going to actually unpin this. All of these objects have various attributes. the camera has a lot. Solar system orbits just has one opacity. Our solar system is a text element, so it has a position, a rotation, a color, and an alpha, which is the same as opacity. If you see alpha, that's basically opacity. Sky is another text element. So all those things can have as many sub-attributes as the objects have. They're all changeable within the timeline. So what I'm going to do with all these is I'm going to have them all fade up at a certain time, or fade out at a certain time. I'll have a transition happen between seconds 3 and 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first put my time over to 3 seconds. Then I'm going to start changing some of the opacities for the different objects. So the opacity of the constellation figures, which is this one here at time 3, if I click the key button, now there's a keyframe that's been added at 3 seconds. I'm going to now move over to 5 seconds and hit the add key button. Now there's another key at 5 seconds. And so I can go up here and click these. When I click on one of the keyframes, it turns yellow and a box comes up called the key properties. If it's a single value I'm clicking on, it'll say that value. So this is opacity. If I've selected more than one value, it would give me, I would say, multiple, and I would any number. It sort of needs to make sense, but for all of them, but whatever number I put in here would be the same for everything. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the opacity of the constellation figures fade away from time 3 to time 4. So time 3, if I click on this, it's 1. Time 4 initially is 1, which means it's opaque. But if I change this to be 0, it now is transparent. So as you see, if I move it across that boundary from 3, where it's opaque, to 4 to 5, which sort of is transparent, it fades away smoothly. Now I can do the same thing for solar system solar system orbits. I'm going to make a keyframe at time 3 and another one at time 5. Now here I'm going to make the solar system orbits off by turning the opacity to 0 at the earlier times and have it go to 1 during that transition. So now when I move this through, at the same time that the constellations fade away, the solar system orbits lines fade on. And I'll do the same thing for the text elements. So when the sky is up at 3, and again, alpha is the same as opacity. So click on the attribute that I want to change. It's already on time 3. Hit keyframe, and then at time 5, I want to change that keyframe. And again, this is the sky, so I want the sky to fade off. So at this time, I want this to be 0. And then for the solar system, I want that to fade on at 3. I'm going to click on color alpha for solar system, click add key, move it over here, add key. Now I'm going to edit this key to be 0, which means it'll be off at that point, and then I'll also, and when you enter a value, I usually hit a return. It should work to move out of the window as well. There's no save. You just have to make a change and hit return. So now, when by the way, I can go to the very beginning by clicking the jump to beginning in the navigation here, or the transport controls. So now I push play. The words the sky and the constellations are there, and then it fades out, and the words the solar system come in. So that's how you can get that transition to work for both those. Now you can each of these frames not only has a keys not only has a number associated with the time. Again, you can't change the time, you can change this whatever parameter is. There's also a pull down showing you what the function is when you go into or out of this key. There's really a curve throughout the entire timeline for all these parameters, and a key is simply a point on that curve that you can move. So in addition to changing the value, you can also change the curvature going into or out of the keyframe. And honestly, the best way to do this would be, in my opinion, is to just go to a camera keyframe and make a key in the middle, and then start making changes and see what happens. It's sort of a trial and error. I think is the best way to learn that. Now keys can be moved, which is kind of cool. So let's say I had this transition that happened at 3 to 5 seconds, but I really wanted to make it from 4 to 5 seconds. I wanted to make it faster and make it, instead of 2 seconds, make it happen over 1 second. So I can Control A in the keyframe editor will capture all keyframes. So Control A, they're all yellow. Now that also includes the ones at the beginning, the ones at the end, if there were ones at the end. So that's probably not what I want. So I can also control and then click keys independently, and I'm adding, they're kind of adding yellow to them. That's one way to capture all 4. Or I can grab them like this. But once I have them, I can grab them as a group and move them over. So now I've made the transition happen, instead of from 3 to 5 seconds, from 4 to 5 seconds. Now one of the things that I do a lot of that I think is very powerful is to add an opacity layer on top of for a fade to black. It's basically a global opacity over the entire display system, whether it's a dome or a monitor or virtual reality or whatever, and to add that as another attribute of the slide. So that is under dome overlays. It's called fade to black. There's a sub element called dome only. You don't want that active unless you want this to only happen in dome. So if I want to have this blank at the beginning, I can move over here to the beginning, right click and say, actually hit fade to black. That'll let you turn everything to black. Right click and say add a timeline. Then move, and in 1 second. The fade to black only has one parameter. It's called opacity, but I can unfade it to black by unchecking it. And now I can add that to timeline, or add keyframe. So now there's a keyframe at time 0, which is fade to black is 1, which means it is blacked out. And at time 1, fade to black is, if I click on this, it's 0, which means it's now we're faded up to full. And if I want at 9 seconds have it fade out, I would put a keyframe, or I can actually right click on this, say add keyframe, and then at 10 seconds click fade to black, right click, and add keyframe. And if I go back with the transport controls and push play, the whole thing fades up. It crossfades into the solar system orbits, and then will fade out. One thing that's kind of be aware of is when you do that that fading, and I can turn back on the timelines. Oops. When you do the crossfading, it doesn't work to just move this with your mouse. You actually have to start at the beginning and push play, and then it'll trigger the necessary things to turn on and off the fading. And what you can do is, if I want to have this black for a longer time, I can move the timeline over here to this point, add another fade to black, add keyframe. Now it's going to be completely black from 0 to 15 frames or half a second, and then it'll fade up. So it'll be a faster fade, but it'll start at black. And this can be helpful if I need to take half a second or a second or whatever I need to keep things covered with where everything's dark, but building the scene underneath it. That way when I reveal the scene, it's already built instead of seeing data loading. So that's essentially what some hints about how to use a timeline editor, and take a look. It's one of the most powerful and fun tools of the program, and it enables you to do some pretty cool things. So have fun.